Hi, I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. Now, some of you may have seen the effort that I put into making this thing, and it's called a muddler. And I put a bunch of information out about it, what it is, what it's used for, and why I made them. But I don't think you got the whole backstory about what led me up to making muddlers. Hang on to your seat, get yourself a drink, because we're going to talk a little bit. Back in 1990, I moved into an old farmhouse over by Union City. The neighbor was the one selling the house. He'd bought the land with a house attached and only needed the 70 acres to add on to his already rather large farm. But he didn't want to see the house torn down or chewed up because he knew the people who lived there and liked them. And he promised he would sell it to somebody who would take care of it. Well, Lydia and I were looking for a Victorian house, and she'd been looking for a long time. We went and saw a lot of Victorian houses. I didn't want to live in town. That's where most of the Victorian houses are. And I wanted to have some room. I wanted to be out in the country where there was neighbors, and so we ended up going house to house looking at Victorian houses. I got to calling them BOBPs, big old brick piles, because most of them were made out of brick. And they were nice, rather square, utilitarian, and not quite Victorian enough for most of the things that Lydia wanted. And then there were the ones that were quite nice, but were in terrible condition. I mean, beat up and damaged to the point where I thought, oh, there's no way in the world I could ever make this thing come out right. And I'm a willing subject for doing effort, but good Lord, when you drive up to the house and the house looks like a sway-backed horse, you know that there's problems. We went over by reading, and this house was a BOBP, and it was the epitome of cool. Kind of creepy cool, but very unique. It was huge. I don't remember exactly how many rooms there were, but it was around 17. Yeah, lots of them. It had a upstairs attic that I could have played basketball in. It was huge. Had a 45-degree peaked roof, sheet metal roof, so the roof was probably in pretty good shape. Sheet metal lasts a long, long time, as long as you paint it every once in a while, like 3 times a century. The only problem was, it had been let go. Somebody didn't heat the house, and it had all the eaves troughs, very modern in its thinking. It had all the eaves troughs pour into a cistern in the basement. And that cistern had frozen and cracked when it wasn't heated one winter. That flooded the basement. Well, the house was a brick house with a wooden house built inside of it. So the wooden house built inside of it sat on top of 3 giant tree trunks. And when I say giant, I mean 5 foot in diameter, sitting down there like big pillars in the center of this house. Well, the bottom foot on those pillars rotted, and the house sank. So the center of the house was about 6 or 8 inches lower than the rest of the house. You could drop a marble in the upstairs and it would roll along and run into the center wall and sit there. And I looked at the house and I thought, well, you can take a house up about 1/8 of an inch a year. But when I'm done, I will have busted every bit of plaster off of every wall in this house. And I thought, 17 rooms, replastering, or at best going through and putting up plasterboard. It would be a tremendous task. So we passed on that house. When John Dunks was out in the front yard putting up the sign for the house on Dunks Road, yeah, same name. His parents lived there forever. I mean, his father used to walk down the street, and he would come over to the neighbor's house, and which is us. And before we moved in, he would take a what they call that, a trombone sprayer, and spray the apple tree every year for him because he just liked doing it. So that was the kind of neighbors we had. And John was out putting in the sign in the front yard when Lydia went across the street to look at a BOBP, which had already sold. Well, the house that John was putting the sign up in front of was Victorian. Stained glass windows in the upstairs, fancy scale work on the siding, 3 dormers, and just really, really cool. But just about the right size. It was big enough. It had, let's see, we had a laundry room, kitchen, dining room, parlor, 1 bedroom, living room downstairs, and then 3 rooms upstairs, so that makes 9 rooms. Just about the right size. And full basement, well, had a Michigan basement. Full basement under the original house, but they'd added onto the house to put on the kitchen and the dining room and the laundry room and the back bathroom. So that part was on a crawl space. That's another story. Anyways, the thing I liked best was there was this big barn, 60 by 60, sitting in the side yard. It was huge. Back was in pretty rough shape. Seems that the the owners of the house had a disagreement. They had gone through and re-sided the front and one side of the building, put up new siding to replace everything. On the west side of a barn is usually the worst because it gets the full sun, and it really did look pretty bad. So they replaced all the siding on it, but they didn't do the backside because when they got around to doing the backside, there was an argument about how it was going to get done. And they were both pretty stubborn. So it never got finished. So what had been the goat part of the building, yeah, there was a goat part of that building. They had a dairy barn on one end, the goats and small animals on the other end, and in between was a huge hay barn and a granary and a stable for the horses, and just huge. It's 60 by 60, 2 stories. Peak of the roof was 40 feet up in the air. Everything I could get out of a 40-foot ladder just to reach it. So I looked at that and I thought, wow, this is great. At the time I had a sailboat. And I talked a little bit about the sailboat before. But at the time I really loved that sailboat. And I thought, I can put the sailboat inside, because I had kept it in the garage one year, left my truck sitting outside and kept the sailboat in the garage while I was working on it. That's the kind of thing that I do. So we ended up shaking hands on that house right there in the front yard. And I bought the house without having listed my other house. Hadn't sold it yet. Didn't know I was going to. I was just going to go look at another big house and say, well, you know, the roof sags and the floor is bad and the plumbing doesn't work too well and it's going to need new service, and just don't think we can afford to do all the work this one's going to need. Well, I didn't do that at this house. When I saw the wiring, I said, well, you know, it needs new service, but that won't take much. And the floors are straight. They weren't, but that's for another story. And, you know, I can fix this house up. Well, the thing that I was really looking at was the barn in the back. There was this really tumbled down pile of junk, barely standing up on its own, packed to the rafters full of crap. Hog barn. Yeah. That's the original idea behind old Sneelock's workshop. I looked at that and I thought it's perfect size. And John, knowing that I was looking at it, said, well, if you want, you can just burn that down and I'll come down with a tractor and we can knock it down into a pile and burn it. And I said, no, I'm going to fix it. And he looked at me a little funny, like, you in what army? Well, long story short, I spent 21 years making into old Sneelock's workshop, the one you see at the beginning and ending of most of the videos. In that barn, I did numerous things. One of the things that I did, Lydia was working for the radio station, and she was the sales manager. And she also went out on the road and sold radio ads, which I did for a short period of time too. One of the things that the radio station did was they did promotions for different various companies. And sometimes the companies would say, well, we'll give you this much product if you run our ads. Or we'll give you coupons, or we'll have a whatever, and you can use that to promote our store. There's a store in Charlotte, Michigan called Johnson's Workbench. If you've never been there, make the trip. If you're a woodworker, it's heaven. They run a sawmill. Yeah, they cut everything. Any kind of wood you can think of that grows in Michigan, they have. And quite a few things that don't grow in Michigan. They have exotic hardwoods and really just, you name it, if they don't have it, they'll get it for you. They also have a huge tool showroom. Yeah, I was right in heaven there. Lydia had been their sales representative for the radio station for, I don't know, a number of years. And they had set up a program where they were going to be doing a run of radio advertising. And when it got all done, they had a bit of a bill. Now, quite often the radio station did what they called taking it out in trade. You ever go into a restaurant and say, do you want to buy a radio ad? Well, radio salespeople said that because that meant that it was going to be a free lunch. We would go to some of the restaurants where the radio station had an agreement with, and if you wanted to eat, you just said that you were with the radio station and showed them your card, and the meal was free. It was written off against the amount of money that they owed the ad program. It also worked for various other places, like I got free car washes, and because I drove my own truck, they paid for the gas for the truck. So I got a set amount of money for gasoline each week. I had 2 gas stations, one in Galesburg and one in Augusta. Now that's a pretty fair drive from Battle Creek, and I had to drive 18 miles to get to Battle Creek, so that gasoline, mostly gone by the end of the week. I drove a truck that got 14, 15 miles to the gallon. I burned up a lot of gas. But anyways, Lydia had Johnson's Workbench as a customer. So at the end of the program, we had money in the bank with Johnson's Workbench. And Jack told Lydia that she could use the money for whatever she wanted. Well, Lydia knew that I love tools. So she said, Dave, go pick out anything you want at Johnson's Workbench. Think about it. Go pick out anything you want at Johnson's Workbench. Well, I drove up there and looked. Loved the store, been there a few times. I originally found out about Johnson's Workbench because I read about it in a magazine. Yeah, they're that kind of famous. I walked into the tool showroom, and there sitting against the wall was a Delta lathe. The one behind me. And I said, that's it. So $1,500, and $1,500 was a big chunk of money at the time. $1,500 later, I owned a lathe and a full set of cutting chisels, lathe chisels, and a stand. Now the stand got left at the other house because I found I liked having it bolted to a bench instead. And I had a lathe. Well, I'd had a lathe when I was a kid. Grandpa had given us, well, actually my dad had his metal lathe at my grandfather's house. And when my grandfather passed, it came to our house. And I used that to turn wood on because we didn't do a whole lot of metal turning at the time when we first got it. Besides, I was 11. I didn't get a whole lot of lathe work in. But we did make round pins because it was a metal lathe, and we used the cutters that were on the metal lathe to turn wood. We didn't realize that you could use wood chisels, lathe chisels. So anyways, we had a lathe and I enjoyed it, and then later on we got it running, and my neighbor fixed it up so that it would actually turn metal quite well. And so I've been using a lathe for a long time, but not much wood turning. So I read up on it. Yeah, there wasn't an internet when I got that. That was 1990, which is 30 years ago. Long time. Well, I think I got the lathe about 1993. Anyways, I loved wood turning. I still do. It's fun. I had it set up in the workshop right where I could just walk over and put a piece of wood in it and start turning it. And I had a huge supply of wood because when we moved in, there were trees all over the property. Now, we never cut down a tree just because, I don't like that tree. We had some windfalls, and we had planted some trees, so we were trying to plant as many as came down. But that still meant most of the trees that were planted in the yard were along the front of the house. They were planted in 1836. Sugar maples. Huge things. Couldn't get my arms around the base of them. I mean, they were huge. And then we had two silver maples sitting on either side of the house, and they were even bigger than the sugar maples. Silver maples get monstrously big. But they kept raining branches down out of them because that's what trees do. Tree grows, something gets injured or just gets old and dies, and down it comes, and windstorm comes through, snaps off live branches, dead branches, any branches, sometimes knocks the whole tree down. So I always had a huge supply of firewood, which I used to heat the workshop with a wood stove. So you just go grab a billet out of the wood pile and walk over to the bandsaw, rough out a shape, and then turn it. Well, I got interested in turning bowls, and that was a big thing for me. I really liked turning bowls. I did bowls for like 5 years. Not every day, not all the time, but I wasn't doing much else. I would work during the day at my various jobs for different companies, and then I would come home and go out in the workshop and just make something. And bowls were easy. So I made wooden bowls, and bowls out of cherry, and bowls out of maple, and bowls out of walnut, and bowls out of every kind of piece of wood that you can think of. So that's what I did. Well, we moved here, and the lathe sat in the barn or in the garage for a while, and I finally had my son help me bring it downstairs. We put it on a handcart and wheeled it down the stairway and got it into the basement here. And I set it on the bench, and it sat there for about a year before I got it working. So it wasn't until about 5 years ago maybe, that I actually had it back up in condition to run. But using a wood lathe makes a tremendous amount of chips. And I'm in the basement. I had stuff piled everywhere, still do. If you look around the shop, I've got stuff piled everywhere. Wood chips tend to get on everything and in everything. So I just didn't do any wood turning. I did metal turning because I was making things that I needed, but I didn't need any more bowls. Remember, I made bowls for 5 years. I had bowls that I gave away, bowls that we kept. We've still got a few of them left. Lydia sold a few of them at her antique shop booth, and that's another story. And I just stopped making bowls. So when the opportunity came to make some muddlers, I said, sure, I can do that. I've made some file handles here. I just didn't really do a whole lot of stuff with it. File handles and the chisel handles, that kind of thing. So I thought, muddler's right up my alley. And I got just the wood for it because, let's see. Well, I was still working at Demmer Corporation when I did that. So that would have been before 2013, so it's been a while back. I know it's a long way around, but coming down 486 out of Lansing, getting on I-69 going south, and then getting on 94 was actually the fastest way to get home. So I came home on 94 and up through Galesburg, and I stopped at the gas station there, and as I was walking in to pay for the gas, I could smell some walnut. And I looked, and here was this pile of firewood bundles, and you saw me breaking apart the bundle and cutting it up to make the muddlers. Well, I said, holy cow, that's already slabbed up. That's good thick pieces, and there's quite a bit of it, and it's $5 a bundle. Let's see, walnuts about $5 a board foot, and just one of those pieces of wood is 2 board foot. So yeah, $5 is a deal. And it said kiln dried. Around Michigan, pretty much all the wood that you buy like that is kiln dried because it kills the bugs. We don't want to transmit bugs around the state because this state has been a lumber state for years. And well, right now, ash trees are just dying everywhere. We have a green ash borer that goes through and penetrates the bark and kills the trees. And that was an import from across the ocean. Practically everything is an import from across the ocean, and it comes in various ways and spreads across the state, usually from the west towards the east, and kills all the ash trees. The emerald borer kills all the ash trees. The house over by Union City was surrounded by ash trees. Huge ash trees. But I digress. That's another story. Anyways, so I picked up the walnut and brought it home, and I put it out in the garage. Well, it sat on top of the file cabinet out there. File cabinets make great tool bins. It's like a giant toolbox with, in my case, 5 drawers that I can put different things in it. Welding helmets, hand saws, you name it, goes into different drawers. And the drawers are huge. So, and they're designed to support a tremendous amount of weight, so you can put a lot of stuff in there. Little tip. Anyways, so when Ryan mentioned the muddlers, I thought, great, that would finally be something worthy of using that walnut. Because you don't want to use up your good wood on something like, well, I made a doorstop. Or, yeah, we used it to turn into toothpicks or plugged holes in the hog barn. That's not what you use walnut for. You use walnut for something that's nice, got some meaning to it. Well, anyways, so I cut it up and you saw the videos. If you didn't, I'll leave a link up here and up here. I'm never sure where they land. It'll be above me. Anyways, I'll leave a link to the video series and you can look at that. I got a nice card from the guy who wanted the muddlers. These are fantastic. I totally appreciate the work, craftsmanship, and effort. Merry Christmas. And he signed it. That means a lot to me. When somebody recognizes the time and effort that you put into something to make it nice, it's a good thing. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.
This video is not to be viewed by anyone under the age of 13 in the US or 16 in the European Union, without the express written permission of the parents or legal guardians of the underage person. Such written permission must be on file at the local government entity in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations established by the FTC. Anyone violating these terms is admitting by default that they hold harmless the owners and operators of this channel. Any and all questions should be addressed to your local branch of the FTC.